Welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is urgency. So, urgency, all of us have it at one point or another. It's just one of those things that kind of happens in life. But when we dive down into it, what is it really? So, when you have urgency, there's a call for your immediate attention to something. There's a pressing need. So, usually we think of emergencies. When something's an emergency, it all of a sudden creates a sense of urgency. So that's a very straightforward, easy way to think about, well, when are things urgent? When there's an emergency. So we tend to operate in an impulsive nature with emergencies. That means that we're not looking to kind of take a step back and think. We're like moving. We're like, it's time to go and figure this out. We got to do it now. So there's a sense of like not what I just did, not like slowing down, like the decision that you had to make was required like 3 seconds earlier, right? So you have to move, and the biggest thing that we learned is that when you move, it's your emotions that essentially are in the driver's seat or have more control. You're hitting that gas pedal because you had to move. And usually when you want to figure out a situation, you tend to slow down, and that's where your brake is. So anytime you have that sense of urgency, that's when your emotions are usually pushing you forward. And what's incredibly important about that is if your emotions are actually in control and you're not in control of them, that's what can be a disadvantage to you. You essentially want to make sure that you are in control of your emotions. You just have to be able to use them as a tool to move you forward. But if they're in control, the faster you go, the more reckless you actually can end up being. And so this is where emotional intelligence is incredibly important. Usually intellectual intelligence kind of takes a little bit of a back seat, but that emotional intelligence is something that is going to drive you forward, and you want to actually be in control of your emotions. So with that, muscle memory becomes incredibly important. Muscle memory is where you start doing and you're not even thinking about it. Why? Because you've done it like 1,000 times. So usually you see it when you're watching, let's say, professional athletes performing their craft. Why? Because they've practiced it over and over and over and over again, right? But they not only practiced it physically, they've practiced it up in their minds. And so when the time comes, they're not even thinking about it. They're just reacting because their body has and their mind have been through it so many times that this is just a routine that they essentially engage and start performing. And that's exactly what you want to do when it comes with a sense of urgency. You want to have muscle memory. Now, in another video that I presented a while back, I talked about these 4 key areas of learning. And we go through this entire process. Everyone actually does. And so the very first one is this area of unknown unknowns, this whole idea that you don't know what you don't know, right? And then as soon as you get exposed to, let's say, an idea, you move from that area from unknown unknowns into this area of known unknowns. So then you become aware of, hey, you know what? This is a topic that I don't know about, but I at least understand that I don't know about it yet. So then maybe you do some homework, maybe you do some research, and you look to learn a little bit more about that topic. And then you slowly start moving into this area of known knowns. This is where you become competent. This is where maybe you see like an expert or a professional performing capacity where you're asking them questions and they know the answers, right? So they're aware that they know the answers and they sort of just put it out there. So this is an area of known knowns, right? But most folks don't recognize that that's one of the most dangerous places to be, because when you believe you have the answer, that means you stop looking for anything new or for anything that can take you to another level as far as clarity. So when a lot of folks operate within that area, they have a sense of confidence, which is a good thing, but they almost have a closed mindset because they look for the answer, and as soon as they find it, they see that, okay, well, you know what, that's the answer, and that's what I'm sticking with, and that's right. But that's not always the case. We've been trained, we've been conditioned into this area of known. So when you go through training, your teacher or your mentor, they might be in that area where they're like, you know what, we know all the answers, and this is it, right? But you have to recognize as a student that you're learning from your teacher or learning from your mentor, but they don't necessarily have all the answers, or the answers that they have may not necessarily suit you. So it's good to be able to take that information in and be able to, let's say, provide a response or make a decision. But you also have to remember that that's not the highest level. The highest level where you keep practicing it, you're still open to new ideas and to new explanations, but you start operating on a level that is essentially the higher level than actually knowing it. And that's where we actually get into muscle memory. Muscle memory is this area of unknown knowns, right? You don't even recognize that you know it because you don't have to think about it. You just do it. And that's a very special place. And again, that's where we see athletes actually get to a certain spot of. And we're in awe when we actually watch them because we see them executing on such a high level. And they're not relying on this whole idea that they know what to do. They already instinctually kind of have it. And they don't even have to think about it. So you actually operate a lot faster when you don't have to think about certain things. And that's that area where you actually want to be. And so your environment and situations create uncertainty for you every day. And the sense of urgency comes from this fear of missing the opportunity to make a decision. And so if you remember what we talked about as far as the 6 fears, fear of failure, abandonment, rejection, loss, the unknown, and fear of success, this is the fear of loss, right? So that's what urgency is actually addressing. And we can use urgency, we actually do use it for survival, but when we take it to a deeper level, we can actually use it as a tool. And we can practice making better decisions by training in conditions that would create a sense of urgency for us. And regardless of them actually existing in the real world, we have the power of our minds and our imaginations to actually create them even if they don't exist. So that's sort of the power of actually being able to use that. And we see it all the time with sports, with any type of event with deadlines, or any type of opportunities with really, really big impacts. So what does urgency actually create for you? So is urgency an area of strength or is it an area of weakness? Do you perform well with pressure or does pressure kind of crush you underneath? What are some environments in your life that actually require urgency? And what are environments that don't actually require urgency? And which environment or circumstances are actually more important for you? So if I were to answer those, I would say that urgency actually creates a area of strength for me because it's something that I practice regularly every day. And as a result, I tend to perform better in pressure situations. They're not something that crush me because it's something that I'm well tuned and adapted to. And so I know it's a strength for me because it puts me in my comfort zone. So I almost need to be in it in some aspect in order to actually function well and actually get better. I'm always looking to improve. And the biggest thing is when you actually execute, your mistakes have a tendency to get magnified with a sense of urgency. So if you're not in a good spot, you make what seems like a small mistake. You're not really considering the consequences. But when you practice, you have a better sense of what those consequences will be. So that's why it's sort of important to understand like where you're comfortable with it. For me, the environments that actually require urgency from me actually demand the majority of my focus. And those areas tend to be in the area of finance, financial intelligence. There's certain obligations I want to make sure that I do not miss and I do not make any critical mistakes with. Anything that has a deadline that is attached to an important task or a goal, or anything that's a disruptive challenge. So if there's anything that kind of comes up and kind of, disrupts my day, if I haven't figured out a solution for it, that tends to take my focus until I actually figure it out. And then the areas that don't require urgency for me are that usually anytime I have something that requires urgency, such as, again, the finance or the deadlines or a disruptive challenge, I will focus on that challenge until I figure it out. So that means if I have to forgo eating, if I have to go forgo sleep, if I have to go forgo social interactions, all of that stuff's put on hold until I figure out the problem that's in front of me. And so that tells me a lot about myself. And with that, if I look at my environment and my circumstances, and which is actually more important, those with that sense of urgency require my focus. So those actually tend to be more important because I put everything else on hold to focus on those things. So that's how you can get a better sense of what is actually important to you, what you actually prioritize. And I mean, that really actually helps out, sort of just knowing what that actually is. Now, how do you actually practice urgency? Well, three real simple, straightforward things. One is have one most important task that you are focused on accomplishing every single day. It's something that's small. It doesn't seem like it's big, but it will require your focus to actually knock it out. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it needs to be specific, and you want to make sure that you knock it out. The second aspect is sports or games. And so I actually use hockey, bowling, and escape rooms as my regular endeavors in order to get better under situations and in environments that actually have deadlines because it creates a sense of urgency for me. I actually like the mix of those three of hockey, bowling, and escape rooms because hockey and escape rooms, they have like this deadline where it's just like it has to happen at this time. But something like bowling is kind of a little bit different because it doesn't really have a clock. It's sort of just your ability to go forward and execute your best. So you don't necessarily have as much of a sense of urgency, but it depends on the situation that you're actually in. So I kind of like that dynamic. It helps me, sometimes just think about what I'm doing, and then other times it helps me figure out how are all these interactions come together to achieve a common goal. And then last but not least is your imagination. Hugely, hugely important. Why? Because even if the conditions don't exist in your environment, you can create them in your mind. And you can do all sorts of things because you can visualize what you want that outcome to be and maybe what you have to go through to get there. And so your ability to create environments that might actually be tougher than anything you actually experience in real life is going to take you to a different place and another level altogether. And so why do we actually want to create urgency? Well, it allows us to perform better in adverse conditions, and practice makes perfect. Now, I won't necessarily say perfect, I'll say better. It'll make you a better person, it'll make you a better individual. But the whole idea is execute, repeat, execute, repeat, execute, repeat, and you're going to get better. And when you get better, then all of a sudden life gets a little bit easier instead of harder when those types of situations present themselves. And you also end up making better decisions. So if you get anything from the day, today's message is that life creates urgency, and you want to operate in the best sort of conditions, the best shape you possibly can. So you want to perform well in urgency. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson today, and I hope you follow me for another one. All right, have a good one.